invite now Dr. Rovinescu, Honoris Causa of the laudatio. Sir, the floor is yours.
Mulțumesc! Bună ziua! Doamnelor și domnilor! Doamna ministru! Domnul rector! Domnul ambasador! Este o plăcere să fiu aici astăzi. Este un moment de mândrie și în același timp foarte emoționant pentru mine primăra titlului de doctor Honoris Causa. My Romanian, as you can see, remains somewhat rusty, to say the least. You heard from the very generous presentation that I left at 5 years old, and as many immigrants did in those days, you made sure that you spoke as little of the language from which you came from as possible. I think that was one of the unfortunate things that happened in my case. But it's a pleasure to actually try to say a few words and practice again. Leading up to this honor, I had the opportunity to read about the fascinating history, now nearly 200 years, of this amazing university, Politehnica University of Bucuresti. Gheorghe Duca and his National School of Bridges and Roads. And indeed I read of the fascinating path from bridges and roads to railways, to engineering and training, to inter alia transport, aerospace engineering, information technology, and computer science, much of which we had the enormous privilege of visiting in a brief tour before coming here, to the #1 ranking engineering school in the country and one of the world's leaders. What a privilege to be invited to become part of the extended family of this wonderful institution. Just this morning, with my very good friend and graduate of this, Eliodor Francu, sitting here in the front, we both practiced engineering expertise by putting together an airplane that we delivered to the Prime Minister with the Air Canada logo. We had a couple of technical difficulties to put it together, but it was nonetheless a success, and so you had 2 doctors of Politehnica working feverishly on the model of the airplane. So while I'm now part of the Politehnica's 2016 graduating class, my last real university degree was in 1980. So much has changed since 1980. In 1980, there were, just think of this for all the young people in the room. In 1980, there were no mobile phones, no internet, no World Wide Web, no personal computers. In 1980, digital music was what happened when you press the on-off button with your finger, with your digit, off of your 8-track cassette. In 1980, right here, of course, the Ceausescu-led Romania was at the height of its destructive austerity program, denying basic necessities as food, heating, electricity, and medical attention, resulting in that horrific reduction in the standards of living that so many people faced. Indeed, as I look at the optimistic streets of Bucharest today, indeed, much has changed in a very short period of time, barely 3 decades. And so we've indeed been privileged to see before our very eyes our world transform, progress, and innovate rather dramatically and quite irrevocably. And especially technological change and disruption is where I want to start today, especially given that we're here together at this wonderful Politehnica on the cutting edge of technology and innovation as we just witnessed. We now live in a world where the flood of choice, entertainment, and distraction never ends. That mobile phone that didn't exist in 1980 can now literally browse 200 million websites, and we carry it in our pocket with mega data. Because we live in a world where the amount of science, and this is empirically proven, the amount of science produced over the past 2 decades has been shown to have surpassed all of the discoveries created over the last 100,000 years. Because for the graduates of universities like this to succeed, and indeed for entire countries to succeed in today's globally competitive reality, change, disruption, and innovation have to be our weapons of choice. Look at my industry, aviation and aerospace. In an industry that just last year celebrated its only 100 years of commercial existence, just think what has gone on since the Wright brothers had that initial flight of 12 seconds. The initial flight was 12 seconds. Aviation today is safer, faster, quieter, lighter, more environmentally friendly, and in many respects, digital. Boeing disrupts Airbus, Airbus disrupts Boeing, Bombardier disrupts Embraer. The Chinese are just getting into it. Low-cost carriers have caused legacy carriers like Air Canada, like British Airways, like Lufthansa, like Air France, like others to be more nimble, more entrepreneurial, more innovative. And now from that 12 seconds of the Wright brothers, airplanes fly 14.5 hours across the globe to virtually any corner whatsoever with dense and complex route networks. Aviation, in many respects, like many other industries, is more competitive than ever, and it needs to continue to change and disrupt to continue becoming more competitive with the help of universities like Politehnica. When it comes to global competitiveness, however, you cannot legislate innovation, but you can certainly inhibit it by being just average. And let's face it, mediocrity is not good enough anymore. Not in science, not in technology, not in engineering, not in business, not in universities. Certainly not in a hyper-competitive world where risk-taking and speed will play a much greater role in defining success. The sobering reality is that one will need a massive dose of change, disruption, and innovation to succeed in a globalized world. One will need a workforce with a global mindset, unafraid of relocating, unafraid to take risk, open-minded to the consequences of disruption. One will need an innovation agenda that involves more than just doing the same thing that we've done over and over again and hoping for changed results. In this regard, I love reading Thomas Friedman, who some of you may know as the well-known New York Times columnist who wrote the more famous The World is Flat, and then a second book, which also very inspiring, called That Used to Be Us, where he starts by quoting President Obama, I guess we can say as he then was, in November 2010. It makes no sense for China to have better rail systems than us and Singapore better airports. And we just learned that China now has the fastest supercomputer on Earth. That used to be us. So just as the President of the United States asked, why is it exactly that China can build airports and trains faster, cover more ground technologically quicker, and develop new industries before our very eyes, where in parts of North America and Europe, we can debate important infrastructure projects like bridges and roads for 5 and 10 years before deciding whether or not to proceed. In a hyper-competitive world, that can't continue. For all practical purposes, average is over. Avoiding mediocrity in business involves taking risk and bringing in innovative products and services, even if we need to operate outside our comfort zone. People always fear risk. Yet to progress, risk and risk of change and even risk of failure are not only good, but I would say imperative. Avoiding mediocrity involves participating in next generation technology. Sometimes it takes more time. Sometimes we have to do it over and over a couple of times. But the best tech companies are constantly operating in beta to succeed in the global arena, disrupting the incumbents over and over. Avoiding mediocrity involves being as nimble as an entrepreneur in an emerging market. I have the great privilege in my job of traveling to interesting emerging markets like Brazil, China, India, South Africa, Turkey, UAE. All of these emerging markets, without exception, have 3 common traits: speed, flexibility, and audacity. Avoiding mediocrity involves being globally audacious. At Air Canada, we've made this a cornerstone of our own strategy. And our intention is to build nothing less than an international powerhouse for global traffic, a global champion, in effect. It entails playing to our strengths and leveraging all of our tangible and intangible assets. Why is this relevant in the context of my remarks to you today? Because just as in business, likewise in a university environment, avoiding mediocrity involves having an international mindset, developing quality programs, recruiting top students, retaining leading scientists and engineers, pursuing outstanding research, and engendering among students, faculty, and staff a deep commitment to learning and discovery. Great universities such as Politehnica create new knowledge, produce high-quality graduates, and impact our society. In many respects, this is both a duty and a privilege. I want to now turn to brain power and knowledge, the stock in trade of universities. Cunoaștere este pur și simplu cea mai valoroasă resursă. Este exportabilă, importabilă, transferabilă, ajustabilă și gata spre a fi exportată pe scară largă. Este cea mai de bază și mai abundentă resursă naturală. This is something I learned early on. As you heard, my father was a surgeon, a urologist with a medical degree from Universitatea Bucuresti. That's where he studied. Who, with a little bit of money, $60 and a couple of suitcases, at nearly 40 years old, immigrated to Canada from Romania with my mother, a teacher, with a couple of master's degree in literature, also from the University of Bucharest, and some knowledge of cultural affairs in China. They left this country in 1960, escaping communism, with their 2 children, and a mother dying of leukemia in tow to start their life in Canada. What my parents had of great value and what carried them through was not what was contained in those suitcases, it was what was contained in their heads. It was their knowledge and the quality of their higher education, their professions, their skills, and their confidence that enabled them to rebuild their lives in Canada, providing their children, my sister Olivia, who is here with me today, and myself with so many interesting opportunities. We're constantly learning and gathering knowledge as we move from one stage of our lives to another, from one experience to another, from one job to another, from one relationship to another. And knowledge is, of course, infinite. You never really stop absorbing it or indeed distributing it as an advisor, as a mentor, as a professor, or as a friend. Giving younger people that first experience, that first sink or swim experience they never dreamed of, or exposing them to some of the places that they may be from in the future, is actually even more empowering than receiving knowledge. Now, getting back to that Tom Friedman book that I was referring to, That Used to Be Us, it also has a fantastic analogy of what it takes in his view to succeed, which, when I look at it in my life, it has had a lot of influence. It says, number 1, think like an artisan. What does an artisan do? An artisan takes pride in his work, puts his initial or his signature on the painting, carves his initial on the sculpture, and that work of art, that artisan's work of art, stays with him forever. Think like an innovator. You know, in Silicon Valley, you have many, many innovators, and what do these innovators do? They're always operating in beta. They're always trying. It may work, it may not work. I built one company, I'm now going to build another company. You see yourself as a constant work in progress. A constant work in progress. It's never fully complete. Think like an artisan, think like an innovator. And he says, think like an immigrant. Why an immigrant? Because an immigrant is fundamentally, has some level of hungry insecurity. You hope to be successful, but you're not too sure. Paranoid optimist is another word that you can use. In other words, I want to succeed, I look for opportunities everywhere, and anything crosses your path is something that is of interest. Stay on your toes as an immigrant. You live with this entrepreneurial attitude where you seize opportunities as they come into your path, and your objective is to leave a lasting legacy in the country that you have come to. So in other words, it's a pretty good recipe of success, I would think, for most people, regardless of career, if you behave and think like an artisan, think like an innovator, and think like an immigrant. The last component of that immigrant is have courage, which is a good segue, because of course, as we know, and we've seen it with much of the immigration that has taken place over the last several years from Syria and other places like this, people leaving their countries with enormous courage in terms of what they face in the new country that they're coming into. And courage is one of the great drivers of success, I believe, and again, in whatever life you choose. We know that fear paralyzes, and absolute fear paralyzes absolutely. You know, Aristotle said that courage is the first of human qualities because it's the quality that guarantees the others. With all the knowledge in the world, we get nowhere without courage. Courage to leave, courage to stay, courage to change or be an unreasonable catalyst for change in others. Courage to be honest, courage to draw a line in the sand, to admit your mistakes, to avoid the temptation to hide, and to rectify things early and quickly. When I came back to Air Canada, and you heard some of that story in the introduction on April Fool's Day, April 1st, 2009, people did not attribute that to courage, but rather some called it a sad form of sadomasochism or self-flagellation. Certainly I was running into a burning house. 2008 and 2009 were the worst years for airlines since World War II, wiping out industry profits for the last decade. Jet fuel spiked to unheard of levels and we were in a global recession. The company's liquidity was drying up, all of our labor contracts had expired, our pension deficit was massive, equity and debt markets were essentially closed. It was the absolute perfect combination for a crisis, but also a time for our leadership team to show some courage. Compared all of this at the time to a Rubik's Cube. Some of you may know a Rubik's Cube from our neighbor in Hungary who invented the Rubik's Cube. Too bad it wasn't a Romanian. We talked about this Rubik's Cube being twisted and turned to all sides in plain view of the world. It had to be worked on constantly. You couldn't solve the yellow before solving the green, before solving the red. It all had to be done at the same time, and at the end of the day, the courage of our team, the courage of our employees made it such that we had lived to fight another day, and the Air Canada brand has not only survived, but has thrived. So I tell you this story not for purposes of complimenting our team. I tell you this for getting at the root of courage. When things are at their bleakest, when people have nothing to lose, they discover their greatest creativity, find the most unreasonable or crazy ideas, and access their deepest resources and are able to unleash their greatest courage. Which brings to the last mindset I want to discuss today, awareness. You know, you can be smart, you can have had a great education, but if you're not paying attention, you won't be able to actually achieve what you need to do. Moment-to-moment awareness of present events can freeze frame time, action and reaction of those around you. You should be able to see, if not hear, a pin drop in the other end of a noisy room. Read body language. Learn how to enter the mind of those you're dealing with, be they your colleagues, your employees, your customers, your partners, or indeed your adversaries. Start seeing around corners. Somewhat theoretical, you might say, but being ultra-aware helps to better explain successes, better explain failures, circumstances in hindsight. I found this form of awareness or mindfulness extremely useful in planning strategy, anticipating reactions, creating alternative realities, and better seeing endings before beginnings. Practice it enough and you can practically read minds. Now, my life's trajectory has given me the privilege to be unreasonable in my own expectations, be aware and audacious and involved in many different communities, and to be proud in carving my initials in things that I have had the privilege to be involved with. That immigrant mindset has encouraged greater courage and speed, and a commitment to higher education, lifelong knowledge and curiosity, and an awareness that we never take anything for granted. Success is fleeting and can be one of life's greatest imposters if we stop being in amazement at the great opportunities that are often presented right in front of our noses. I want to thank all of you for this honor. I want to thank my wife Elaine, my sister Olivia, my good friend Jacques Shore, who's here, as well as my very good friend Eliodor Franco, who has guided me so much in Romania has become my rock here in Romania. Vă mulțumesc pentru această oportunitate unică. Este un privilegiu desobeit pentru mine. I like that, desobeit. I practiced that a couple of times. Este un privilegiu desobeit pentru mine. Este o onoare pe care o să pot în inima pentru tot de anul și de care părinții mei ar fi extrem de mândri. Mulțumesc, thank you very, very much.